Good evening, and welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance and interest to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this evening's edition.
Without further ado, Brother Jimmy Riley.
Thank you, Scott, and welcome, brothers and sisters. 1934 was a tumultuous year for the labor movement in the United States as the country continued to struggle its way out of the Great Depression. The labor battles that raged in 1934 were preceded a year earlier with a sense of hope and promise for workers struggling for the necessities of survival against brutally oppressive employers. Following the Depression, in the first year of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency, a series of economic programs were implemented to aid in the recovery of our country. In 1934, Congress passed the National Industry Recovery Act, which was the first actual bill to guarantee and protect collective bargaining for workers in the United States. Immediately, large-scale organizing campaigns sprung up along the eastern seaboard and its industrialized area across the United States. Yet, enforcement of the act by those very individuals charged with its administration was woefully inept and met with stiff resistance from employers. Frustrated union organizers fought with little success for the collective bargaining promised in the NRA. Once again, the stark reality became clear to the workers of this country. Once again, the government's empty promises were not kept. Once again, workers would be forced to win democracy in their workplace the hard way. The battle lines were drawn. In 1933 and 1934, workers organized across the length and breadth of this country, fed up with speed-ups, oppressive, unsafe working conditions, child labor, and company control of too many aspects of their lives. In those truly epic years in the United States, workers in the United States fought for dignity and respect in their workplace by using the only weapon they had left in their arsenal. In 1934, workers hit the bricks and held 15 major strikes. Most notably were 4 strikes that labor historians agree were the most important strikes in the history of the United States. The Toledo Autolite strike in 1934, which pitted 6,000 automotive workers in a 5-day running battle with 1,200 armed members of the Ohio National Guard, known as the Battle of Toledo. The clash claimed 2 lives and injured 200 more. But the victory led to widespread unionization in Toledo and was the beginning of the United Auto Workers' rise to prominence in organizing the automobile manufacturing industry. The Minneapolis Teamsters strike in 1934, which changed the city of Minneapolis. The strike paved the way for mass organization of the over-the-road drivers throughout the Midwest and opened the doors of union membership to thousands of Minneapolis workers in other industries. The 1934 West Coast longshoremen strike lasted 83 days, triggered by sailors and culminating in a 4-day general strike in San Francisco, which crippled the local economy and broke the back of the open shop company unions that led to the unionization of all the West Coast ports in the United States of America. The 4th and largest strike was a 1934 General Textile Strike, which was the largest strike in U.S. history, involving over 400,000 workers from Alabama to Maine. The strike began over fair wages and working conditions in an industry awash with unfairness, abuse, child labor, dangerous working conditions, and minimal pay. In September of 1934, in Rhode Island, the Great Textile Strike engulfed the primary industry in the Ocean State and required the calling out of the Rhode Island National Guard for riot duty. By the second week of the strike, tensions between workers and owners erupted into open conflict, centered in Salesville, now Central Falls, where we stand today, and in Woonsocket. On September 10th, the continued misuse of force by deputy sheriffs, closely allied with the owners of the huge Sale Textile complex, provoked large-scale rioting in and around the Salesville Bleachery, which is right over here, and steaming out along Lonsdale Avenue and into this very cemetery where workers fled from guards and sheriffs armed with rifles and machine guns. The workers used headstones to block themselves from the incessant volley of bullets trained on them. Gravestones tell the stories of those who rest below them. And in this cemetery, some of the gravestones tell another story. Some of the gravestones carry the scars of machine gun bullets, as did so many of the workers who were wounded in that massacre and two who would not leave the cemetery alive. The ultimate sacrifices borne by workers in the strikes of 1934 and perpetuated upon them by guardsmen, vigilantes, and company thugs are unparalleled in labor history even to this day. Those workers earned and deserve our respect and recognition for paying the ultimate price of martyrdom so that others might be free from worker exploitation. In 1934, 33 workers became martyrs in the American labor movement. In Florida, Frank Norman, an organizer, was kidnapped and murdered. In Georgia, textile workers Leon Carroll, Reuben Sanders, and V. Blaylock were shot and killed. In Texas, Charles Shapiro, murdered on a picket line. In Alabama, coal miners Ed Woolens, H.C. Collins, and Ed Higgins were killed. In Louisiana, longshoreman Murphy Humphrey was murdered by sheriff's deputies. In Kentucky, miner Pezzy Adkins was ambushed and murdered by vigilantes. In South Carolina, textile workers John Blackborough, Lee Crawford, E.M. Knight, Ira Davis, Claude Cannon, C.L. Ricker, and Maxie Peterson, all murdered by guards at the Chicula Mills. In North Carolina, Ernest Riley killed on a picket line. In Chicago, bakery worker Joseph Skondowitz killed on a picket line. In Wisconsin, Leo Wakefield and Henry Engelman were shot down by deputy sheriffs. In Minnesota, Teamsters Henry Ness and John Belor were killed by police. In Washington, Shelby Daffron and Otto Heeland, both longshoremen, lost their lives. In California, longshoremen Howard Sperry, Nick Bordoy, Richard Parker, and John Knudsen killed during the longshoremen strike. And in September of 1934, textile workers in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, Jude Courtemanche and Leo Rouette fell from tyranny's bullets, as did Charlie Gosinski and William Black on this very hallowed ground in Central Falls where we stand today, on this Labor Day of 2011. My brothers and sisters, since we stood here last year on Labor Day, 1 year ago, to commemorate the Rhode Island martyrs of the Great Textile Strike of 1934 by erecting this memorial on this spot in the Meshasik Cemetery to the martyrs of the Salesville Massacre, the attack on the labor movement here in Rhode Island and nationally strongly mirrors the oppressive treatment of workers so long ago. Nationally, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, sound familiar? Decision in the case of Citizens versus Federal Election Commission, made it possible to allow unlimited amounts of corporate money into the United States political system. This played a heavy hand in the election of new anti-worker, anti-union officials and the attacks that followed. And this madness is what followed in 2011. Since the November 2010 election, the big business anti-worker agenda across the United States has bankrolled and introduced right-to-work legislation in 15 states. In several states, legislators have attempted to eliminate automatic dues deduction. In Minnesota, legislators have attempted to take away whistleblower protection and to eliminate overtime pay for construction workers. In Maine, Republican Governor Paul LePage removed a mural honoring workers and Maine's labor history from the state's Labor Department building. He followed that with a right-to-work law. Republicans in New Hampshire, right here in New England, pushed for a right to work. In Missouri, in what can only be described as a Tea Party sideshow, Republican legislators tried to roll back child labor laws. In Oklahoma, the Republican-controlled legislature passed a law that requires a parent's consent for teenagers working in a grocery store to be part of the union. That one cuts pretty close to home. Republican legislators in Tennessee want to make union rallies and picket lines a crime. In Pennsylvania, the Republican governor wants to privatize the state-run liquor stores, jeopardizing $500 million in revenue and threatening the wages and benefits of the union workers who work in those stores. In Ohio, the first state to legalize public sector collective bargaining, the Republican supermajority meant that the legislature passed and Governor Kalish signed into law SB 5, stripping Ohio's public employees of the right to bargain collectively with their employers. And in Wisconsin, the legislature passed and Governor Walker signed a budget that denies teachers, firefighters, and state workers the fundamental right to collective bargaining. And in Rhode Island, right here in Rhode Island, since last Labor Day, the Westin Hotel in Providence, where workers are represented by Unite Here Local 217, attempted to impose a 20% wage reduction, slash health insurance costs, and outsourcing of the jobs of many of the union workers. In Providence, the labor union was once again under attack and used as a scapegoat for the economic woes of the states and municipalities when the school boards voted to fire all 1,926 teachers on February 4th. After months of bargaining in good faith, Laborers Local 1322, Cranston bus drivers, were faced with a bleak future when the City Council recommended the privatization of the town's bus service. At Amica Insurance in Lincoln, the company eliminated the jobs of 55 maintenance workers by privatizing their department to a contractor with a history of NLRB violations. IBEW members at Local 2323 were forced out on strike when Verizon officials attempted to take back 45 years of collective bargaining by eliminating job security, paid benefits, and sending jobs overseas. And right here in Central Falls, the site of the riots of 1934, the Rhode Island Department of Education waged a war on the public teachers halfway through a 3-year contract. On February 23rd, the Central Falls Board of Trustees voted to issue termination notices to all Central Falls high school teachers. The board read the name of each individual in a crowded auditorium. like the textile strike 77 years ago, the labor strike in Central Falls became national news once again. So what did labor do? We did what we always do. We picked ourselves up, we brushed ourselves off, and we fought back like we always do. We stopped the right wing's agenda to legislate right-to-work laws in all 15 states. We stopped them from repealing the Minnesota Whistleblower Act of 1987. Governor LePage of Maine lost his bid to turn Maine into a right-to-work state. In New Hampshire, Governor Lynch vetoed the Tea Party's right-to-work law the moment it hit its desk. In Missouri, the anti-union state said it would not have its way. We soundly defeated their attempts to eliminate child labor laws. Pennsylvania will not be privatizing their liquor stores thanks to an extensive lobby and education campaign by organized labor. In Ohio, Governor Kasich's approval numbers are in the 30s, and his anti-union collective bargaining bill will be on the November 8th ballot, and the latest poll numbers show 56 to 32 to repeal. In Wisconsin, Governor Walker's numbers are worse than Governor Kasich's. After stripping public unions of collective bargaining rights, and 2 safe Republican state senators lost their recall election and were replaced by pro-worker candidates. And we fought back in Rhode Island too, beginning with the State House massacre of 2010. In November, the members of Rhode Island unions, sent a message to the State House. If you're going to run as a Democrat, then you damn well better vote like one. The members proved it by working hard to defeat 6 incumbent Democrats hostile to working families and replace them with worker-friendly Democrats. Weston workers, members of Unite Here Local 217, ratified an agreement after a successful boycott with significant gains in their contract and no privatization of union jobs. The Providence Teachers Union reached a new 3-year agreement with all termination notices rescinded. After intense pressure from organized labor and the general public, the Cranston School Committee decided to end their foolhardy quest to privatize the 90 bus drivers, members of Labor's Union Local 1332. IBEW 2323 workers are back to work after being forced out by Verizon 3 weeks ago, after the company agreed to streamline negotiations and continue to bargain in good faith. And last week, the Rhode Island Board of Regents voted 7-1 to reject charter schools in Cranston. They can knock us down, but they can't lick us. This is Labor Day. This is our day in Rhode Island, home of the first Labor Day parade in this country. And every working man and woman in this state owes a great debt of gratitude to those who were knocked down and got back up, and to those of us today who continue to march. We are the labor movement. And we say to all you workers, whether you're union or non-union, you're welcome. You're welcome for the 8-hour day. You're welcome for the 40-hour week. You're welcome for child labor laws. You're welcome for safe workplaces. You're welcome for paid vacation and sick days. You're welcome for health insurance and pension. And you're welcome for this Labor Day weekend and every other weekend of the year. Because we're the union and damn proud of it. Thank you. Thank you.
He reminds me of someone. I don't know who it is.
In any event, we like to celebrate Labor Day and remember the people who came before us, who worked very hard so that we could enjoy our standard of living. And Labor Day today is being celebrated at the museum with a play called The ITU Meeting. You know what the ITU means, kids? The Independent Textile Union, very good. And some of you might say, how come I used to know it as the Industrial Trades Union? That's because later, in the 40s, they changed the name because other industries came in, like barbers and electricians and so on. So the ITU still remains the ITU. The meeting that you're attending today is because of something that happened last week in 1934. And that is a strike, a national strike, which found its way here in Woonsocket. And the ITU, and you've been given, I believe, the latest copy of the ITU News, on sale, 10 cents a copy, 50 cents a year, if you're interested. And I think it tells you exactly what happened. And one of the tragic events that happened at the strike and the riot, two different things, is Jude Kutamant. Jude Kutamant was a young man who was shot during the riot. And of course, Leon Brouette, who is also a victim. He died a week after this meeting. Okay? So keep that in mind. It's about real people. They're going to hear from real people. The dialogue is basically from research, newspapers, obituaries, and so on. And the ITU News itself and the ITU history. And I think you're going to enjoy it. And I see today we have a good audience, and we're ready to go. Sorry, but if you don't have seats, it's because we ran out. And for little kids like you in the front, you're lucky to get front row seats. This takes place during the Depression, in a time in our country when people were out of work, they didn't have enough money, couldn't buy enough food, had very poor clothes, and so on. Okay? So just remember what they're talking about takes place at a time, from time to time. Thank you for coming here today, and again, welcome back, and enjoy the play.
Good evening, everyone. From the outside, very important meeting of all these things, so I'm glad you're here. Joseph Schmitz, nice to meet you. President of the ITU. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you all. Joseph Schmitz, President of the ITU.
My name is Steve Harrigan. I'm the Secretary today, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. I'd like to know what your opinion is about the are you for it or against it? Do you have an opinion at all? Were you around last week? Launched that crossfire. What's Thank you.
Call this meeting to order. Take your seats, please. My name is Joseph Schmetz. I am president of the Independent Textile Union, better known as the ITU. Before we begin this special meeting, I'd like to acknowledge one of our members, Mr. Henry Berthiaume, a brother of Local 801, Carpenters and Joiners, who built this podium. This meeting is the first time we'll use it, so thank you, Brother Berthiaume. At this time, I'd like to ask Therese Kudamash to come forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Therese is the younger sister of Jude Kudamash. If you would all please stand. Ladies and gentlemen, we've called this special meeting primarily to review our position in light of events which occurred last week outside of the Woonsocket Rayon Company on Clinton Street. Since this is a special meeting, non-union members have been allowed to attend and participate, and we've also invited members of the press to attend, and I will introduce them to you now. They are Ms. Andrea Palmer from the Woonsocket Call and Evening Reporter, Wilfred Ledoux from La Tribune, and C. Herbert Harrington from the Providence Journal and Evening Bulletin. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to remind everyone in the audience that throughout this meeting we must conduct ourselves as good American citizens. Now, before we begin, are there any questions?
Excuse me, President Schmetz, I have a question for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, sir, not many of us here know who you are. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself? Aren't you a foreigner, sir? Weren't you born in Europe?
Yes, that's a very good question. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, because it's true. I am not from this country. I am from Europe, Belgium to be exact. After the Great War in 1919, I left my country to seek a better life for myself and my family here in America. Being a skilled worker and a mule spinner, I found work easily. First in Toronto, then in Buffalo, then in Lawrence, and finally here in Woonsocket. Along the way, I learned much about the American way of life and what it means to be an American. For example, here in America, do we not consider this country to be the land of opportunity?
Yes, Mr. President.
And in this country, do we not believe in justice for all?
Yes, that's true, sir.
And in the words of Thomas Jefferson, isn't the goal of this society to encourage the pursuit of happiness?
I would say so, Mr. President.
Well, young man, that is what I seek. Not just for myself, but for every member of this union. To guarantee that no worker is denied a fair day's wage for a good day's work. That is the justice that I seek. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
At this time, then, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you the special guests for today's meeting. They're seated to your left. On the far left is John Lackacher, who represents this great city's manufacturers. Next to John is union member and organizer Ann Burlap. And next to Ann, the Honorable Felix Stupin, Mayor of the City of Woonsocket. Joining us. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to read to you the report of this union's investigation into last week's riot. This is to make you aware of the events which led to those tragic days. Please remember that this is not an official report, but is part of this union's honest effort to uncover the truth. On Saturday, September 8th, a mass meeting of all ITU members was held, and it was agreed that our union would support the general national strike. As a result, on Monday morning, September 10th, almost every mill in Woonsocket remained closed except for the Woonsocket Rayon Company on Clinton Street. The union formally requested the Woonsocket Rayon Company to close its doors to keep the peace. The request was not heeded. As a result, a picket line was set up by the ITU. The Woonsocket called it an orderly strike. On Tuesday, September 11th, the first so-called incident occurred. A crowd collected in front of the mill, surrounding the peaceful pickets. One of the crowd threw a stone at the rayon plant. Police retaliated with tear gas bombs. A 42-year-old woman and two 19-year-old boys were arrested. the ITU and the UTW disclaimed any responsibility for or knowledge of the violence. The ITU, of course, appealed to its members to refrain from any violence. On Wednesday, September 12th, a great crowd, estimated by the Providence Journal at 2,000, gathered at the Rayon plant gates just before the change of shifts at midnight. In an effort to disperse the crowd, several tear gas bombs were thrown by the police. The crowd retaliated with stones. More tear gas bombs were thrown. At this point, most of the crowd went home. However, a roving gang of young men continued the stoning as they retreated from the tear gas. Firing rocks as they backed away, they began smashing streetlights. Cruising through the social district, they broke into a department store and a liquor store and helped themselves to the stop. They then continued overturning cars, smashing streetlights and store windows until the entire social district was in a shambles. At about 1 a.m., 19-year-old Jude Kudamash came walking down Cumberland Street on his way home. Seeing the crowd gathered in the doorway of a liquor store, he crossed the street to see what was going on. Out of the darkness came shots, admittedly fired by the police, and Jude Kudamash, an innocent bystander, fell dead. The makeup of the gang of hoodlums who used the strike to cause all the destruction in the social district has not been determined. Every eyewitness interviewed declared that not one ITU member was among the group of hoodlums that caused the damage. However, many members of our union believe that the whole affair was arranged in order to discredit the ITU. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we've called this special meeting today. At this time, I've been asked to give a few moments to the family of Jude Kudamash, the young man who was killed in last week's riots. So with your permission, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Kudamash and Jude's youngest sister, Therese. Mrs. Kudamash.
First of all, I want to thank all of you who attended my son Jude's funeral at St. Anne's Church. The church was filled with people who shared our sorrow. I want to thank the members of the ITU who expressed their sympathy. As those of you who knew Jude, you know he was a good boy and never wished to harm anyone. He was just passing by and they shot him. I also want to thank the members of the ITU for being at the funeral and walking in the cortege from our home on Burnside Avenue to St. Anne's Church. Someone said that there were more than 500 of you who participated, including the pallbearers. I also want to thank the people who lined the streets and showed their respect when we went to Precious Blood Cemetery. At a time like this, it's very comforting to see your friends and neighbors supporting you. And also at this time, Mr. Schmitz, Jude's little sister, today would like to say a few words.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the funeral of my brother Jim. I love my brother very much.
I would also like to remind everybody to pray for those that were injured that day, especially for young Leon Ouellette, who was also shot, is struggling and fighting for his life as we speak. He needs all of our prayers.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at this time I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. John Lackacher. I know many of you are familiar with this man. He's an example of what is possible in this country. He is a man who, through hard work and determination, rose from humble beginnings as an unskilled laborer in the Garrett Mills to currently running that company's corporate operations. Ladies and gentlemen, John Lackacher.
Thank you, President Schmitz. As most of you know, I come here tonight representing the city's manufacturers. I hope that my presence here will show you that the industrial leaders who I represent are willing to have a dialogue with you in order to prevent any future crisis. I have been directed by members of the Slater Club, who, as you know, represent the manufacturers of the area, to tell you that it was never their intention to create such disturbance as we witnessed only 1 week ago. I have also been authorized to tell you that the members of that elite club are more than willing to discuss any topic which may have led to that most unfortunate situation or anything that may come in the future. As many of you know, I speak for myself as well as members of the Slater Club. As somebody who has come up through the ranks, as you might say, I understand your feelings, and I empathize with you. After all, many of my friends are workers and leaders of the ITU. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Lecter, could you summarize for us the meeting that took place at the Slater Club 2 days ago? My sources tell me that the manufacturers, there was quite a discussion about future policies. They even hinted there might be a conspiracy against the ITU.
I don't know who your sources are, but I can assure you that no such conversation took place. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press, I guarantee you that there is no cover-up. These gentlemen have the utmost interest of their workers and the ITU at hand. Why, they totally realize the value of their employees.
Excuse me, sir, but aren't there some of these manufacturers who consider themselves to be above the law?
What exactly do you mean by that question?
Allow me to elaborate.
Please do.
Is it not true, Mr. Lackacher, that there are some of these manufacturers, particularly those from Europe, who have stated that since they are not American citizens, they would only comply with the laws of their country and not to those of the United States?
Oh, come now. This may have been true some 25 years ago, but I assure you no such attitude still exists. Why, these gentlemen, they understand the need to comply with American legislation.
In particular, you mean President Roosevelt's New Deal program?
Yes. Yes, I suppose that is what I mean. Undoubtedly, with the passing of the National Industrial Recovery Act, which guarantees the workers the rights to organize and to bargain collectively, that this has had an impact on these industrialists.
Thank you, Mr. Lackacher.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs no introduction. She is a union member, a well-known union organizer, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say a legend in her own time. Ladies and gentlemen, Ann Burlap.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ann Burlap. I was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My parents were immigrants from the Ukraine. I learned early in life that organized labor is the best way to get equality and justice in the workplace. Let me tell you a story. When I was very young, 14 years old to be exact, I was hired as an apprentice weaver in Pennsylvania. I was paid $8 for a 52-hour work week. The boy hired a week after me was hired for the same job and paid $12 a week. When I complained to the overseer, he said, "If you don't want the job, then quit. There are many others who will take it." Well, when I got home that night, I was very upset, and I complained to my father, who had been blacklisted by the steel industry for union organizing. He said, "Ann, don't waste your time complaining. Organize." From that moment on, I decided to become a union organizer. I was a founding member of the National Textile Workers Union in the 1920s. That is why I made it my business to be here last week to show my support to the Woonsocket textile workers.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I have a question for Ms. Burlap.
Very well, ask your question.
Ms. Burlap, aren't you the same person who encouraged the strikers on Clinton Street last week? Didn't you tell them to do whatever it took to bring down the Woonsocket Rayon Company? And didn't you say that—
Hold on there, young man. I did not say any such thing. All I told them was that in order to succeed, the union members must stand together as one. I explained that when you are in a fight, you fight with a closed fist, as one, like this. That's unity. That's strength.
Excuse me, young man. I believe that answers your question. You can sit down. And thank you, Ann, for that very candid response.
Just one last question, please. Ms. Burlack, when you were 16 years old, were you not once arrested?
Yes, I was. I was 16, and I was arrested for reading the Bill of Rights at a public rally.
Oh, well, was that the only time?
I know where you're going with that question, young man. Yes, I was arrested again in 1930, along with 5 others, including Negroes. I was arrested for protesting racial discrimination and Jim Crow laws in the workplace. By the way, young man, those charges were eventually dropped.
Thank you very much.
Oh, not so fast, young man. You forgot to ask me about my activities in organizing textile workers in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, resisting wage cuts, holding rallies, resisting layoffs and reduced hours. And just 2 years ago, with 17 million unemployed in the nation, I led the Rhode Island delegation in the National Hunger March to Washington, demanding unemployment insurance. I am proud to say that I do my best to defend the American workers. Many names in my day, but the red flame from hell is probably the most famous. I don't know if it refers to my hair color or my political leanings, but I accept it and wear it proudly as my red badge of courage. The courage I need whenever I'm involved with the creation of unions for the American workers. This union you call the ITU is only one of many sprouting up across the country. Tell them, Mr. President, about this organization. Tell them why it was necessary to create the Woonsocket ITU.
Very well, then. This might be a good time, ladies and gentlemen, to remind you of the reasons for the establishment of this independent textile union, the ITU. As many of you know, this union was established just 3 years ago, during this nation's darkest hour, the Great Depression. It was a time when many had lost hope, when we were forgotten men. It became a beacon of hope for those in despair. In the words of President Lincoln, this is a union established of the people, and by the people, and for the people. But the work of this union doesn't stop at the factory gates. No, my friends. This union works to address all the needs of its members. It is like a fiber woven into every fabric of our members' lives.
Mr. President, could you please elaborate as to how this is done?
Why, certainly. In addition to the work that we do on the shop floor, the ITU holds educational programs for its members, such as lectures and forums. We have held classes in English and American citizenship. We hold social events such as outings and picnics. Currently, we're investigating the possibility of providing low-cost housing and medical coverage for our members.
Excuse me, Mr. President. The last two that you mentioned, housing and medical coverage. This seems to be what some might interpret as socialism. Is this what the ITU is all about? Experiment in socialism?
Call it what you will. Times are changing, and these proposals are no different than those proposed by President Roosevelt in his New Deal.
Mr. Schmack, can we get back on the purpose of this meeting, namely last week's riot?
Certainly. Ask your question.
Actually, I have two. There have been various conflicting reports about who fired the shots that killed and wounded those strikers. Have you determined who was responsible? And some have said the ITU was responsible for the outbreak of violence during the evening of September 11th. What's your reaction to this?
This is our Bible. These are the words that we live by. And nowhere in this book does it advocate the use of violence. In fact, on the afternoon of September 12th, I called upon our members to continue our policy of watchful waiting and to refrain from any form of violence. I commented on the peaceful manner in which the ITU was conducting its strike and called upon our workers to continue their good conduct. For the record, Mr. Palmer, no one at the ITU ever advocated the use of violence. Those accusations are completely unfounded and were probably established by those opposed to the growth and success of the ITU. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question for Mayor Dupin. Excuse me, Mayor, but many people have questioned the use of the Woonsocket police.
What exactly do you mean?
mean by that, young man? Could you please explain?
Well, sir, many people I've interviewed have told me that if you had sent the police to the social district as opposed to being sent to the banks and the homes of the city's manufacturing and financial elite, that maybe the riot could have been prevented, not to mention the fear that people had. I interviewed many people that night. One of them was a girl, her name was 14-year-old girl, Alberta General. She told me that she goes to St. Anne's School and she lives on Social Street. She said that night the lights had been broken by the rock throwers and it was really dark. And she and her friends saw the mob approaching and they were really scared. But there were no policemen there to protect them.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. But please keep in mind that I dispatched police to areas which I felt were in danger. And on that topic, I relied strictly on the professional advice of our police departments. I have no further comment.
Thank you, Mayor.
Just a minute. Let it be clear that it wasn't only the rioters who were injured that day. 5 of our policemen and 1 fireman were also injured. These men were sent to protect, not to inflict injury.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, but I'd also like to comment on that point. Because we believe it was not union men, but a bunch of thugs and rowdies who took advantage of the situation last week to cause trouble and looting. Even Governor Green has acknowledged that point. He has completely exonerated the ITU.
Well, if I may, I don't necessarily agree with those comments. However, if I may, I would like to take a couple of minutes to address the audience. Ma'am.
Yes, you may.
Good afternoon. Earlier today, Arthur Turgeon, he is the president of the Main Street Merchants Association, came to my office and asked me if I would read an article that he brought to me from the Boston Sunday Post. The article dealt with the strike, of course, and the curfew, and here it is right here. See, the strike, curfew, it's Woonsocket. So if I may, I would just like to ask you to just give me a minute to read this, and then I will answer the questions about the curfew, any questions that you may have. Here's the article. Over the strong protests of Woonsocket merchants, all the stores in the city of Woonsocket, which depend mainly on the Saturday night trade for their profits, were ordered closed at 6 o'clock last night because National Guard officers feared another outbreak similar to that of last Wednesday, which was the worst in New England since the general textile strike started. The curfew for liquor shops, theaters, and other establishments, which has been in effect ever since the big outbreak, was still in order. In the city, usually a beehive of trade on Saturday night, was silent and subdued throughout the evening. Of course, that's the gist of the article. And if I may address the curfew issue, please keep in mind that it was the head of the National Guard himself who ordered the curfew. And he ordered the curfew to prevent another outbreak such as which occurred last Wednesday night here in Woonsocket. On the subject of the stores being closed on the busiest night of the week, Saturday, I acknowledge that of course did occur, much to the dismay of many people. The stores were ordered closed by the National Guard, especially the liquor stores, to minimize the problem. I don't know if anyone has any questions at this point. Sir?
Yes, Mayor. I have a question for you.
What is your name, sir?
Jack Slater.
Jack, go ahead.
Well, I can understand the closing down of Woonsocket's liquor stores. But why the theaters, Mayor? We have 6 theaters here in Woonsocket that are well attended, such as the stadium. Let's face it, Mayor, it's the only form of entertainment we have here in the city after a hard work week.
Yes, I do understand your concern, Jack, and I will admit that I too had a problem with that particular decision. But you know, I believe that the National Guard feared the gathering of large groups of people. But you know, I tell you what, I will personally contact Governor Green in the morning. I will ask him to seriously consider lifting that curfew. Does that satisfy you, Jack?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Well, we're all concerned about a return to normalcy, so thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your help in solving this difficult situation.
It's my pleasure, and you're very welcome. And please know that I certainly do understand the gravity of the situation. Here, this might help to minimize things a bit and to ease the tensions. Only yesterday morning I received this letter from the governor himself, and he did ask me if I could share some of his contents with your audience at this meeting. So again, if I may, in indulge you, I would certainly love to take another minute or so just to read this letter. This will not take long. Are we all set? Here's the governor's letter. My fellow Rhode Islanders, it was only a few days ago that our state experienced the most disruptive situation. As governor, I felt that it was my duty to ensure the restoration of peace in the city of Woonsocket. Consequently, I ordered the Rhode Island National Guard to assemble in that city with specific orders to restore domestic tranquility. Furthermore, I requested federal troops from President Roosevelt in order to restore law and order. At this point, I received no reply. Contrary to what some may believe, it was never my intention to undermine the activities of organized labor. Well, during the crisis, I publicly proclaimed my neutrality between the strikers and the mill owners. I have since been convinced that the violence which erupted was caused by a small group of communists who had infiltrated the labor organization and encouraged the rioting and the looting. Let me assure you, a thorough investigation will be conducted in order to root out those outsiders and have them brought to justice. The curfew, now pay attention to this, Jack, the curfew will be lifted once we are sure that the peace has been truly restored. In the meantime, I hope that both sides will find it possible to recognize each other's needs and reach a mutual agreement. If there should be a need to use my office as a mediator, I would be more than willing to offer my services. Sincerely, Theodore Francis Green, Governor of Rhode Island. So there, President. There you have it. Those are the governor's thoughts.
Excuse me,
Your Honor.
it seems to me that the governor is trying to place himself in a position that he will maintain the support of the union in the upcoming election. Would you please comment?
Well, I certainly cannot speak for the governor. I can tell you, however, that we have had several telephone conversations during the past week.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, could you tell us about those conversations?
No. Those conversations were somewhat of, what shall we say, a personal nature.
calm down.
I certainly
Tell us.
Well, Mayor, please go on. I believe you have no choice.
What should I tell you? I must be careful. Please remember, I must be discreet.
In particular, Mr. Mayor, what did the governor say about the demands of the union?
The governor has told me he's very concerned. He told me what he told the press just 2 days ago, that we must lower the expectations of labor. We must try to convince the leadership that times are bad, and that we must all come together to reach a reasonable solution to this crisis. He also confided in me that he must lead the fight for law and order to protect the interests of the strikers, the manufacturers, and, of course, the general public.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Well, once again, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your help resolving this very difficult situation.
You're very welcome, and again, thank you for inviting me here today, Mr. President. It is my firm hope that the ITU and the manufacturers can come together and reach a solution to this crisis. And please know that I am offering the services of my office as an amicable means of settling this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind offer, Mr. Mayor. Will you please thank Governor Green for us?
I shall. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a most exhausting week, but I do believe that in the end, the ITU will be stronger because of the ordeal.
Excuse me, do you expect your membership to increase because of the riot?
Why, yes. Last week's strike brought forth the plight of labor and awoke many to the need to organize. The battle with Woonsocket Rayon Company was no war of the roses, but its winning was a historic milestone in this area. As a result, the ITU acquired statewide prestige. Its members will get the best contract in the industry, and health hazards have been virtually eliminated. Yes, I do believe that the ITU will grow stronger, and that our membership will increase dramatically.
So, now that this crisis is over, what do you see for the future of the ITU?
That's a very good question, and let me answer it for you this way. Recently, and especially in the past week, we have received many inquiries about membership. For example, as some of you probably know, many of the city's largest firms became union shops only recently. For example, the French Worsted, the Falls Yarn, the Lawton Spinning, the Star Carbonizing, the Montrose, and the Alsons all became union shops just last year. By Labor Day next year, we are expecting that many more will have fallen into line. I'm not at liberty to disclose their names at this time, but you can rest assured that very shortly, announcements will be made. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this special meeting of the ITU. Please feel free to remain and socialize with one another. And don't forget about our outing this Sunday at Cass Park. It should be a good time for all. But before I close this meeting, let me introduce for you the people who made this special meeting possible. They are Shola Sanella as Andrea Palmer of the Wisconsin Flag. Stephen Warsaw as Wilfred Ledoux of Rockford News. Darren Cooper as Steve Herbert Harrison of Harlem Jason Tibia as Jack of Mount Union. Eileen Blaze as Mrs. Peter Marsh and Samantha Keith. They're making their way. Bert Kaya as John Lancashire. Samantha and Irene. As Ann Burlap. And yours truly, Eric Eccleston, as Joseph Schmitz, President of the ITU. We also have a couple of very special guests we'd like to acknowledge today. First is members of the family of Ann Burlap. Ann's daughter and brother are here today. Ann's daughter, Kat Wright. And John Lacachure's grandson is here today, George Lacachur. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at this special meeting.
Why don't you get up there? I'll take your picture. Go, Jason.
Grab one and have your costume. Little by little.
It's like Are we ready? Romeo, I can send it to an email if you...
Thank you for joining us for this evening's edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen 3 times each week here on Channel 14. Join us on Tuesdays at 7 p.m., Thursdays at 8 p.m., and Saturdays at 5 p.m.